Hi, and welcome back to the Pleasing God Podcast, a show focused on helping Christians to think biblically, engage practically, and live faithfully for the glory of God. I'm your host, Jonathan Soul, and on this episode, I had an awesome time to be able to sit down with a friend, my former doctoral supervisor, Dr. Matthew Haste. He's a professor at Southern Seminary, and we just had a great time talking about theology in the church and why it matters, why theological training is important for leaders and for the whole congregation, and how the church can benefit from formal theological education. So I hope as you listen to this, you're encouraged. It helps you to think carefully about theology, how that is applied in the church. And if you're just thinking about, what can I do to grow as a theologian? Hopefully this episode can provide some practical insight and wisdom into that. I hope you're blessed by listening to it. Well, Matt, or Dr. Haste, or whatever I should call you, is Matt okay for
Absolutely.
this? Yeah. Thanks for joining. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Glad to be here.
And just want to talk about something that I think we're both really passionate about, and that's theological education and in the local church, and why the church still needs kind of pastor theologians for today. I know this is a lot. That has a lot to do with what you do at your work down at Southern Seminary, and you are the lead of the Doctor of Ministry program?
Yeah, the Director of Professional Doctoral Studies.
Okay, the Director of Professional Doctoral Studies. You want to just talk a little bit about what that is and what that entails?
Yeah, so I have the privilege of serving on the faculty at Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. I've been there about 7 years, and I teach in areas of biblical spirituality, biblical counseling, classes kind of focus on practical theology as it relates to pastoral ministry. And then I oversee the Doctor of Ministry and Doctor of Educational Ministry degrees, which is what we call professional doctoral degrees. And so what that practically means is those are advanced degrees designed to aid people who are in ministry and want to grow in knowledge and effectiveness at what they're already doing. So we're trying to train expert practitioners in the field of ministry, pastoral ministry, missions, Christian education, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and let me say from experience that it's a really good program.
Yeah,
and I was blessed to go through it and to get to know you through that program as you were my supervisor.
Yeah.
And
you're one of our star alumni.
Hey,
so we're grateful for you.
I'm thankful, and I can even say my church is thankful for affording me the opportunity to go through it and to learn. And I think of all of my education, I went to Bible college, then I went to seminary, did my MDiv, and I just couldn't get enough. And so it's just, go on to the next. But of all three tracks, I would say the D-Min program was the most beneficial and practical, especially sitting in cohorts with other brothers in ministry, and getting to learn from them and also the professors, and being trained to go back into the church and apply the things that I'm learning. And so just a wonderful opportunity. And, if anyone's listening and they're thinking, should I continue past my MDiv? Absolutely. It's well worth it. And the training, it's valuable for life. So I want to talk a little bit about that, why the church still needs theologically trained leaders, pastors, leaders. And when we think about the church today, oftentimes we can, maybe lament the larger church, and I don't really want to do that. But when we think about local churches, there is a need for training. There's a need for continual training. And I think through your years of experience, you've probably seen that as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll maybe just start by connecting that immediately to the work we do with the D-Min program.
Yes.
Because I appreciate everything you said there. I mean, what you described is in many ways what we hope all of our graduates would be able to say, is that this both strengthened me as a leader, as a pastor, as a minister, and it blessed my church. It was a blessing to my church for me to grow in these ways, to study deeply and to continue my training for the sake of the people whom I'm shepherding. And when I started leading in this program, one of the things that kind of struck me was, as it relates to Christian ministry, we don't have a sort of a formal process of continuing education as we do in many other fields.
Sure.
So if you just think about your school teachers in your congregation, most of them get a bachelor's degree, and then they get a master's degree, and then every year, every semester perhaps, they're required to do professional development and things like that. And we could think about any number of other vocations that have a similar track where you don't complete a degree program and then enter the workforce presuming that you have learned everything you need in those 3 or 4 years for 40 or 50 years of faithfulness. And yet in Christian ministry, often it is the case that, if we think of pastors, a brother goes to college, he goes to seminary, and then he goes to pastor. And it's a lifetime of trying to draw on that, draw deeply from that well. And, not everyone has the opportunity to do additional degrees, but I think part of what we're doing in the DMin is we're just trying to strengthen pastors in the work they're doing and give them opportunities to sharpen the tools and explore new areas and even kind of refresh their own training, because the longer you're in ministry, the more you're encountering a world that's different than the world you were trained in. And
for sure.
So that means you benefit greatly from kind of going back to the classroom and studying deeply.
And so I know that the track that I went was doctor of ministry in applied theology. And the moment I saw that, I was like, yes, that's what I want to do. I'm a very practical-minded person, and I always keep thinking, how do I connect theology with life in the local church? Why does theology matter for the church? Because it does. Theology matters because, it's the basis by which we do everything. Yeah. And I'm reminded of the late R.C. Sproul's book, where everyone's a theologian, and the question that's asked is, are you a good one or not? Right? We all, by virtue of calling ourselves Christians, make a theological claim. We know God. That's inherently theological. And so kind of want to just maybe talk a little bit about why theology matters, generally speaking, and then how do we apply that to the church? Every Christian is a theologian, but we want to know, do we do that well or not? Where do we get that from? And maybe even talk a little bit about your history or your kind of coming up as a theologian, right? Because you would certainly, if you teach theology, you are a theologian. And so what was your development theologically, just through the church, through the seminary, and how did those kind of cross paths together?
Yeah. I would say, just in general terms, it's been a journey of learning to love God with my mind. That's where I would want to locate it for kind of every Christian who's listening, is just, maybe you're not called to pastoral ministry, maybe you're not called to teach in a seminary, but if you're following Jesus, you're called to love God with all your mind, in addition to all your soul and your body. And so theology at its very most basic level is learning to think and speak rightly about God, and learning to order your life in accordance to His Word, to live in active obedience to Him, and all of that we could just summarize as saying loving God. But it does begin in the mind. It begins with understanding who God is, what He's revealed in His Word, and being able to speak rightly about that. So I think for me, my personal journey, I grew up in a family that attended church somewhat casually, but enough that I heard the gospel and came to faith at about age 12 and began to walk with the Lord slowly and with some stumbles in high school. But He was gracious, He was kind, and He preserved me in those years.
When did you know that I've been called to be a theologian, or I've been called to be a teacher of God's Word?
Yeah. Actually, it was a pivotal moment for me, because my high school time was just really, I would describe it as just trying to kind of hang on to my faith. Like I'm just trying not to completely lose this in some sense. And even that thought was, I think, shaped by some poor theology in the church that I was in at the time. Some of your listeners will kind of catch what I just said there and understand exactly what I meant.
Yes.
Because that was really how I thought of it at the time, was I've got to live a certain kind of life lest I lose this grace that's been given to me. And then when I got to college, I think I got into a healthier church. I got into around people that were really teaching me the Bible. I began to read the Bible on my own, and that began to shape me in a number of ways. But if you would have asked me freshman year of college, are you going to grow up and be a pastor or a seminary professor? I mean, that was the furthest thing from my mind. I wasn't thinking about that at all. But the short version of the story is I was on a retreat with a group of college students from my college. I went to Western Kentucky University, so this is like a campus ministry retreat. And
what's the mascot at Western Kentucky?
The Hilltoppers.
Okay.
Yeah, that big terrifying red blob.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. So Big Red.
Yep.
Strikes fear in the heart of every child.
I'm a Liberty. I graduated Liberty for undergrad. The Flames. Whatever.
Yeah. Big Red's at least a crowd favorite. Everybody loves Big Red. Nobody hates Big Red.
Yeah, that's right.
So
he's a hard guy to hate.
That.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And we're the Hilltoppers. If you go to campus, you'll see why. It's on top of a hill, so it makes some sense.
There's no mountains in Kentucky.
Yeah, that's right. So we were on a fall retreat, a group of college students from a campus ministry, Western Kentucky University. And basically, they had this time where everyone was going to share some different things that the Lord was doing in their life. And this girl stood up, and she began crying, and she began to confess sin and talk about how she'd been living in despair and just how difficult life had been, and then she sat down, and no one said anything. And I remember in my head just thinking, somebody's got to respond to her. Someone needs to encourage her. Yeah. And I just felt a sense of just direction from the Lord of, why don't you? And before I really thought about what I was doing, I stood up, I opened up my Bible to literally what I'd read that morning. Yep. And I just said, can I just share with you what I read this morning? And John, I was a very shy person. This was not something I was
way outside of the Matt Haste comfort zone.
Yeah, this was not like in my personality. I mean, genuinely, this was of the Lord. Yeah. I had zero desire to do that. If I would have thought about it, I probably wouldn't have done it.
The anxiety would have came up. Like, I'm not doing that.
I just stood up and opened my Bible, and I just said, can I just encourage you with something I read this morning? And that's read whatever I read. Yep. I said whatever came to my mind to say. I hope it was true. I hope it was helpful. But when I sat back down, I had this thought in my head, that's what I want to do with the rest of my life.
That felt really good.
Yeah.
But like, not just like that I feel good, but yeah, I can understand that. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And it wasn't in that moment, okay, now I'm going to be a pastor, I'm going to be a professor. There was not that kind of clarity, but just that sense of, I want to open God's word. Yes. I want to shepherd his people. I want to proclaim his truth to help his church. I knew in that moment, this is everything I want to do.
I tell, I've said it often to people in my church. I didn't go to seminary to be a pastor. I went to seminary because I just fell in love with the Bible and loving God with your mind. Yeah. And I just couldn't get enough of it. If you asked me years ago, are you going to be a pastor? I don't know. But wherever, I just want to go where I can help people follow Jesus and learn the scriptures. And one of the greatest joys that I have, and I know that you can say the same thing, is when you start to see these like light bulbs, just they turn on for people and they start making biblical theological connections. I never saw that. Or like, I understand my Bible better, or I'm walking more faithfully to with Jesus and helping others. Like, I live for that. I don't, great message, good sermon. I don't need that. But someone comes up and said, I understand that better. Thank you. serving them up God's word and get out of the way, right?
Yeah.
And so that feeling of like, I helped someone, God, the Lord used me to help someone, whether go through a struggle or to be encouraged, that's so rewarding. And a lot of those are the treasures of heaven, right?
Absolutely.
But that's what keeps us motivated. I think that's what, is certainly something that gets me out of bed. To be,
absolutely.
I love that story. That's awesome. Also, when you think about theology and why it matters, it certainly serves as guardrails with us too, and especially in the church, because it can help good theology helps us, from drifting, wondering, am I going to just hold on to my faith, right? I mean, as we're rooted and we're grounded in truth, we become more stable. And then as we're stabilized, we can help others to grow and be a bit more stabilized too. So obviously you and I are cut from the same cloth in the way that we think theology really, really matters. And there are some that, kind of can be skeptical of, big theology books, you've heard the difference between, 18 inches between head and heart. It has to go through my head before it gets to my heart, right?
Yeah.
And I understand that, but we should not be afraid of an intellectual faith, and reading and diving deeper and seeking, because theology isn't just about what we know, but it informs how we live, and we won't live what we don't know. And so I think it's very important that we make the connections, from head to heart, and that theology for the church matters. And for everyone that's listening, you want a trained, pastor theologian, because he can only serve you what he has, right? You can't feed people from an empty plate. And so it's very important that we should look for trained and respect and esteem those that have been trained, again, but that are making the connections from head to heart to the people. And I think it's very valuable. The outcome of theology isn't all the knowledge that I have, but it's the heart that loves Jesus and loves people, right? And so I love how you started with, theology is loving God with your mind. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. And theology is your mind, but it informs the rest of our being, right?
Yeah. And it even encourages us in the lives we live and increasing our affections to God. I mean, I think, to the person who's maybe concerned about theology or cautious about theology, I would just encourage them with a few things. I mean, for one, we have a God who's revealed himself in word, right? And so God has not chosen to just do a sort of series of actions and events in each new generation. He preserved his revelation in a written form that it could be studied and learned and passed down from generation to generation. And we see that all the way back in the Old Testament in the way God called his people to teach the law, to pass it down from generation to generation, that they might know. And you think about like Psalm 78, that picture of families passing down the law of God from generation to generation, that children yet unborn would know the God who did these things and what he did, right? And so that's just who God is. That's how God works. He's revealed himself in word, but then within his word, if you study closely, you see there's a warning that knowledge can puff up.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so we do need to take that and be thoughtful about that and recognize that increase in knowledge does not always lead to an increase in obedience or character or anything like that. And there's a lot to talk about there. But it also doesn't always run in the opposite direction, that having less knowledge means you have more love.
Yeah.
In fact,
good.
you often see passages that weave the two together, So I think of like Philippians 1, when Paul says, he tells the Philippians how he's praying for them. And he's praying that their love would abound more and more with all knowledge and discernment, right? And so he wants them to grow in love. He wants them to be more loving people. We could talk about how that translates into action with knowledge and discernment, right? And so he's not thinking of those as, you can either know God and have discernment, or you can love God and love people, but he's wanting to see those woven together in their lives.
It's not an either or, it's a both and.
Right.
2 Peter 3:18, but grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. There's this growth in grace, love, a life that is cultivating the fruit of the Spirit, and knowledge. We can't grow in what we don't know. I was talking, I don't know if it was in a sermon just recently, but sharing with people that we will always know a little bit more than we do. But what we want to try to do is to decrease that gap, in that we're applying the truth that we know. But you're never going to apply more than you know. It's just, it doesn't make sense, right?
Right.
And so, I reject the false dichotomy of, it's either knowledge or experience, or it's theology or loving people. And it's like, theology informs me to love people, to love God.
Right.
And we need to lean into that more. Everyone needs to be a theologian. But theology applied, right? And that's worked out in many ways. But let's talk about some practical ways by which a church benefits from a pastor or a culture of intentional theological training. And I can think of a few that came to my mind, and you might think of some other ones. But theologically trained leaders, what they bring to the table is doctrinal clarity, sound preaching, wise pastoral care, discernment that you'd already talked about. We'd say gospel-centered leadership, and the ability to navigate complex issues with biblical wisdom. Don't get mad at me about this one, but it was years ago, I was sitting in your practical theology cohort. The first time I went down for the first kind of class in the D-Men program, and you walked through kind of 4 categories of, we wouldn't call it theological triage, or would we? It was practical.
I call it practical theology, or practical theological triage.
Okay, so if I don't remember all 4, don't get upset. But I thought about this one, and the ability to navigate complex issues with biblical wisdom. Do you want to talk a little bit about just navigating with practical theology and wisdom and discernment in that way? And what are your categories again?
Yeah.
To refresh me and everyone else who is listening.
I'll start with those, and I won't quiz you. So
I already got the degree. It's over there.
That's
so
right.
It's already done.
That's right. You've got the degree. You don't need to worry about an exam. So, the idea is, first the word triage it comes from the word sort, and we use it primarily in medical context, where you come to the emergency room and they're triaging your need to determine the severity or urgency of the issue. So that's what the word triage. And then our president at Southern, Dr. Albert Mohler, about 20 years ago coined the term theological triage that several books have been written about since. At least coined the term to describe a particular way of thinking about doctrines. And so theological triage then is sorting doctrine to determine its severity, its urgency, or we might just think of it in terms of its centrality to the faith. Right?
Okay.
So when we're thinking about theology, we're thinking about everything from the Trinity, the person of God, how has God revealed himself as Father, Son, and Spirit. And we could also think about something like particular interpretations on eschatology. What's going to happen at the end of
those are in 2 different categories.
Yeah, and so theological triage is a means of sorting those to recognize that both are important, but they're not equally important, and they don't bear an equal urgency. If we have a new believer, we care much more about them understanding who God is than we care necessarily about instructing them in the various views on, what's going to happen at the end of time.
At what state or what millennium are we living in?
Exactly. And then they also help us to discern a bit at the local church level, just what it looks like to partner together for the gospel. So to put it kind of simply, if you're talking about a third order issue, you may have differing opinions even in your own congregation, but manage to still have fellowship together, serve the Lord together, have a healthy church together. That might be something like particular views on the millennium.
Yeah, sure.
In most churches that you could have multiple views among the church and even among the elders. There'd be no concern. In the a second order view is often a second order doctrine is often a doctrine that actually divides churches by design. So here we would be talking about something like baptism.
Yeah, that's right.
Paedo-Baptists believe that we ought to baptize infants as a sign of the covenant. Credo-Baptists, like you and I, deny that, and we believe that baptism is reserved for confessing Christians,
like the New Testament
so
says.
Exactly. And so there's just a reality that Presbyterians and Baptists have separated on that issue for a reason. However, what theological triage helps us recognize is that second order issue is distinct from a first order issue, say the Trinity.
That's
or the gospel, various other issues, the person of Christ, the work of Christ. And essentially, theological triage helps us to sort out our doctrine so we're not reacting to differences on the Trinity in the same way that we react on differences in eschatology.
The difference between a Presbyterian and a Mormon.
Right. Yeah.
Theological triage says you're not both Christians, right?
Yeah, there's a greater severity when we are different on first order issues.
And I think it's important to note, and it's said many times, if everything's a gospel issue, nothing's a gospel issue, right? And so we do say like first order gospel issues. One of the ways that I've talked to my church about it is thinking about your capital C convictions. These are the hills that you die on, and I've tried to instruct people that like don't have 1,000 hills to die on, but you do need to know, like, I'm planting my flag here, and this is the test of fellowship, right? Of almost orthodoxy, we would say. And then there's your second tier. I call these the lowercase c convictions. This is where you find your church, right? This is where you're not in a church where you have to like fighting for what you believe in all the time, right? And then your third tier, maybe those are your preferences. Style of music, or maybe not quite preferences. They might be, convictions, but like where I'm okay if we're a little bit different on this.
And you see that even in the New Testament. I mean, I think in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, "I delivered to you what was of first importance." Right. So in other words, he's asserting in that text, what I focused on was top tier.
That's
right. Most important. We might say first order. And then you also have passages like Romans 14 and 15 where Paul talks about these kind of disputable matters. This starts to get into the question you actually asked me about practical theological triage.
Let's go there.
Because he identifies these issues in which he is quite comfortable to acknowledge that some Christians are going to have different convictions on a matter than others. So theological triage is about sorting doctrine to establish urgency with particular claims about the faith. Practical theological triage is a means of applying our theology carefully and acknowledging that there are similarly different levels of counsel given in Scripture. And that's going to work out in our practical theology or our applied theology in a variety of ways. And so the system that I work off of, the grid that I work off of is just 4 tiers. It goes command, wisdom, conscience, preference. And so a command is basically something where God has said clearly what to do or what not to do. And so to transgress a command is to commit sin.
Yes.
Right? It's very, very clear you're defying the law of God. An issue of wisdom is a tier beneath that. It can certainly lead to sin, but there's a category in Scripture, we see it all the time in the Proverbs, where something is labeled as foolish, but not quite sinful. And so the illustration I always go to is Proverbs 7. The wise man says he perceived this foolish, naive young man, and he's walking down the street late at night, alone, on the street near her corner, and eventually, as the chapter concludes, he ends up in the bed with another woman. He commits adultery. And so I like to read that passage with my students and ask, okay, at what point did this man sin, right? And the reality is he didn't sin by being out late at night, right? He didn't sin by talking to this woman, right? He didn't sin by going out alone. He clearly sinned eventually. He defied the command of God when he committed adultery. But the category of wisdom and its counterpart, folly, it gives us a secondary category where you can recognize, okay, it might not have been sinful for him to be out alone late at night and on the corner near her house, but morally it was stupid.
Yeah.
It was not a good idea. And so wisdom helps us discern those paths that are likely to lead to righteousness, and then those paths, conversely, that are likely to lead to folly or sin.
Something my dad used to say to me growing up. He'd say, "Son, nothing good happens after midnight."
Right. That's right.
I'm like, "But Dad, I'm just going to hang out.
Yeah.
You need to be home."
Yeah.
And that's wisdom.
A lot of wisdom in that.
There's a lot of wisdom in that. And now as a father, I'm like, oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Dad, nothing good happens after 10 o'clock, let alone.
Right.
But
when you become a dad, those things, you want to elevate them to commands.
Yeah, that's what you're starting to say. Hey, there was a lot of wisdom there.
Yeah.
You've lived a little bit longer than I have.
That's right.
All right, so
that's
wisdom.
the first two. So command and wisdom, and then conviction is basically combining wisdom and personal experience. Is how I think about that. So think about what Paul says in 1 Corinthians, where the whole discussion in chapters 8 and 9 about meat sacrifice to idols.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
And so he talks about how their consciences were wounded because of former association, right? And so the situation there is it right or wrong to eat this meat sacrificed to idols? And this is one of those instances where Paul says, I think it would be fine, but here's why I wouldn't do it in certain circumstances. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
But the point is, some people are going to possess particular convictions that are, they may correspond to biblical wisdom in some sense, but they're deeply personal. Right? They're informed by their own experience. And so maybe it's a past pattern of sin. Maybe it's having observed folly in someone else's life that led to destruction. And they just say, okay, for me, I know this goes beyond what God commands of us. But for me, I'm just going to hold tightly here. My conscience is narrow on this issue. And I'm not going to engage in this or that, or
while others can, I can't kind of attitude.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's deeply personal.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think wisdom is generally a wide path that most Christians can agree on. We can maybe debate certain things. Is this wise or not? But conviction, by its definition, is personalized because it combines experience, and your experience is different than my experience. That includes present tense. So you live in New England. I live in Kentucky. What?
Welcome to north of the Mason-Dixon, by the way.
Yeah, that's right.
It's good to have you up here.
It's treating me well so far. So what is what you might consider inappropriate in your context might be permissible in my context. What I might consider inappropriate in my context might be permissible in your context. Again,
this would probably play
experience.
Out really in cross-cultural situations. I just thought of it now, but you
have to really think carefully about context as you're thinking about conviction because, and I think that's exactly what is happening in Romans 14 and 1 Corinthians 8 and 9,
Yes.
as the gospel is crossing cultural boundaries. And especially in Romans 14, there's the Jewish Christian, the Gentile Christian debate there. And so you've got two cultural backgrounds, two historical understandings of what matters and doesn't matter. And Paul's trying to lead them toward unity, right?
Yes.
So in matters of conviction, I think the New Testament commands us to respect each other's consciences, respect each other's personal convictions, but to not bind one another's conscience on matters that truly belong in that category. And then the fourth category is just what I label preference, and that's essentially something that is, I would just say, morally benign. It may have some loose connection to Scripture in some sense, but as it relates to life and godliness before the Lord, it's primarily a function of taste, background, culture, even life stage.
What would be something just practically that would fall into that category?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, many things fall into that category.
I know,
because there are just so many things you sort out on a regular basis. So, let me just think of some things that might impact a local church in particular. So, like, I would say, like, the particular style of music.
Okay, yeah.
So, I think the content, there are conversations about content that are a little closer to doctrinal matters.
Yes.
And, we want to be singing truth, but the amount of instrumentation, the particular style of music, those are largely functions of preference, right?
How it's presented, kind of that
how
way.
it's presented. Even,
Musicians on the platform versus on the floor.
Yep, absolutely. How we dress on Sunday mornings would be another issue of preference. I mean, again, it's just very culturally informed, and you may have a few people that hold that as a sort of conviction based on some sort of experience, or just what they were taught growing up, or something like that. But largely, if we really drill down to it, it's really just a matter of, I just think it'd be better to do this.
You have just
don't
given
really have a biblical reason for this.
This is a living example of why theology matters and why it's important to have pastor theologians that can think through these categories to help the others in the congregation. Because a lot of times when there's like strife and sometimes even rifts that could lead to disunity, it's because certain things are in the wrong category of like, well, my preference, I'm treating it as though it's
like it's first order.
It's a first order of it's a command.
Yeah. And that's one of the principles of triage, right? I mean, you go back to the emergency room, if a person comes in with a lingering cough, we don't treat them in the same way as if a person comes in having just been in a car accident, right? There's an urgency that informs how we respond, right? And it would be malpractice if we got things out of order. And I think we see similar things. We can do similar errors doctrinally, but then on a level of applied theology, there's that temptation to treat distinctions in preference as if the person is failing the command of God, right? And I think convictions, personal convictions, are especially dangerous because, again, they are informed by personal experience. Yeah,
and the challenge can be is when a personal conviction is understood as a universal conviction that you seek to bind others' consciences to that thing that is meaningful to you. A sign of maturity is recognizing it's a personal conviction,
right?
And resting in that. But yeah, I've seen in my own experience where the elevation of preference and just trying to help people, like, this is where you land on this. This is fantastic. You can be there, and I want you to be there. But recognizing what category that belongs to, and I think in doing so, everything that you just talked about, especially in practical theology, this helps to strengthen the health of a church and the growth of a congregation. Like I said, it's a living example of why theology matters for the church, so that we can think through these various issues and still retain brotherly affection, partnership in the gospel, knowing who we can and can't partner with. Promoting the unity of the church.
Yeah, I appreciate you making that connection, because often people think that theology leads to division. And I think what we were just talking through there is how theology can promote unity, right? And how having a theological grounding for how we operate and how we speak about different issues can actually promote unity in the church rather than division.
Yeah, and I think that's just wonderful. So thinking through theologically strengthens a church, grows church, unifies a church. That is pleasing to God. And that's what God desires for his church. This is a great conversation.
Yeah.
And we are already at time.
Yeah.
But I could just go on this for a long time, but I feel like we just scratched the surface. But then again, I hope that just having this conversation is encouraging. I mean, you've encouraged me, and I hope that those that are listening are also just encouraged to think carefully about theology and to look at it as a very good thing for their own pursuits. And also, as you're looking at your pastors and your leaders, that you want them to be theologians that are constantly growing. As we started out at the beginning, not that they went to seminary, and then they're just trying to pull back on everything that they've learned, but that continuing education, because the whole church needs it. We are a body of people growing in grace and knowledge. It's a beautiful thing, especially when we're all aligned on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we could have a whole nother conversation about the value of theological training for pastors in particular, because you think about Titus 1, Paul speaks of a qualification for pastors, for elders, for overseers, that they're able to instruct in sound doctrine and correct those who oppose it.
Yeah.
And so that presupposes an operational knowledge that you're able to instruct in doctrine and you're able to correct when others are teaching falsely.
Oh yeah, you
it's
see
an
that
important part of stewardship in the local church.
Absolutely, yeah. The expectations there, both on the positive and the negative command, and you see it throughout 1st and 2nd Timothy as well. Paul's serious about it.
Absolutely,
and I think it's a worthwhile conversation. We should think about doing that. Well, Matt, thank you for joining me on the podcast. And again, just scratching the surface, but hopefully it whets some people's appetites to think about theology. I think your categories of practical theology are so helpful, and that's definitely a good nugget from this one. So
thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to thank you for listening to the Pleasing God podcast. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. You could reach out at questions@pleasinggodpodcast.org. And remember, 1 Thessalonians 4:3, this is the will of God, your sanctification.